Hello, my name is David Brooks. I am a columnist at the New York Times and the chair of Weave, the social fabric project at the Aspen Institute. And I'm joined by my good friend Yuval Levin. Yuval is head of social, cultural, and constitutional studies at the American Enterprise Institute. He edits a magazine, a very great magazine called National Affairs, and he's the author of this fine book, Time to Build. Yuval, we've both written a lot about institutions. We're at a time where people have lost faith in them. But your book is built around an interesting distinction between, well, describe to us the distinction you make in the book.
Well, sure. Thank you, David. It's great to be with you. The book argues about the sources of some of our loss of trust in institutions. And among the primary sources lately has been a sense that people within some of our major institutions have lost the sense of what those institutions are for. So that rather than seeing them as formative of them, as shaping their character and giving them a responsibility, a role, a place, they see those institutions as performative, as places to stand and put on a show in the larger cultural theater of American political and cultural life. And so they see them as platforms for themselves. And you can see that in our politics, you can see it in the business world, you can see it in the academy, in the media. Institutions that are being used as platforms by the people within them are just harder to trust.
Yeah, now I could see how we all know what performative looks like. I know a lot of people who run for the Senate so they can get on TV or so they can write books. But what does it look like to be formed by an institution?
It looks like understanding yourself through the role that you have. So you might say there's such a thing in the world, say, as an attorney or an accountant. And it's pretty easy to say when someone is behaving in a way that is very unaccountant-like, right? And you can very easily sort of tell, well, that's not what that person is supposed to be doing in this situation. I think in a lot of our institutions now, we've lost the sense that, say, there is such a thing in the world as a member of Congress, someone who thinks of themselves as a legislator, rather than, for example, as a cable TV news personality. That distinction has pretty much been lost in our political life now. And I think increasingly in a lot of ways you see that with journalism too, where people are trying to build their own brand rather than see themselves as operating within an institution, within a profession, under a set of guidelines and rules. The purpose of those rules is not just to constrain them, it's to empower them, to enable them to have a claim on our trust. And when they step out of those boundaries, it's much harder for them to make that claim.
Yeah, and I would say for young people, there's just a lot of more insecurity today because of the failure of institutions and because of the failure sometimes of each other. The thing that worries me most is not even trust in institutions, but trust in each other. And if you ask people a generation ago, are most people trustworthy? 60% said yeah. And baby boomers, older people, still sort of have that sense. But growing up in a much more insecure world, a world where basically history has let you down, people under 30, only 19% say people around them are trustworthy. 70% say, most people are selfish and out for themselves. That's just, the world looks like a more dangerous place, I think, for a lot of people.
The striking thing about that, too, is that if you look at some just objective measures of well-being in our society, it's not actually that easy to explain why that has happened. So people are as healthy as ever. Our economy was doing okay before the crisis and will be doing okay after the pandemic. Some basics of sort of well-being seem to be all right. But yet, as you say, people have this sense that we're divided, we're broken, you can't trust people on the other side, whatever the other side might mean. There's not a sense that we're all in this together. And I think that that's as much a symptom as a driver of a loss of confidence in institutions. There's just not this sense that we are one whole society that's engaged in one common life. There's increasingly a sense that we're teams, we're clans against each other. And so you can't trust that people who aren't on your team are somehow on your side in some other way. And it matters, if your doctor votes the way you do, or if your employer does, in ways that just wouldn't have been a question in prior generations. And so I think these things are just related. The polarization of our national life has a lot to do with the reason why people don't feel like the institutions are there for them.
I just did this story for The Atlantic on trust, and I asked all these social scientists, like, okay, how do you rebuild trust once it's gone? And they weren't much help. They were like, yeah, we don't really know because we haven't really seen that. Do you have a sense of how you rebuild trust?
It's an enormous challenge. It's not easy to say how a society can reverse the trends we've lived through, but I think thinking about them in terms of reversing probably isn't quite right. We have to think about them in terms of building. from where we are now, what do we need to be building so that we can get to a place where we have some more social trust? I think the key to that, and really the key to being hopeful about America in general, is to look at our country from the bottom up and not from the top down. We're not going to be able to start by building political trust. We're not going to be able to start by fixing Congress. I think you start by helping people to work together on problems that are near at hand. And if you're looking for examples of where communities have come back together, it's been around very practical problems where people have had trouble getting enough food during the pandemic, or people have had trouble integrating immigrants within an urban setting. And you can see people sort of coming together and figuring out how to solve that problem. If you want to see government working, you have to look at the local level, then maybe some states, and then think about how Washington can change. And I think that's just the direction to think about when we try to think about rebuilding trust.
Okay, well, it's been a pleasure to see you, Yuval.
Thanks
So
very
thanks
much.
for